Hey, we're all here. Hi, I am Joanna Grover. I am the co-author of the Choice Point with Dr. Jonathan Rhodes and the co-founder of Imagery Coaching. We're delighted to have this conversation today around imagery versus visualization. Before we begin and I introduce our amazing guests, I'd like to invite you all to participate by putting your questions in the chat. We're going to try and get to all of them. Those that we don't get to, we'll get to after the webinar, or those of you who are listening after the fact, you can email us. We love curiosity, right, John? Yes. We love to have fun and we love to be curious, and this is a space that the imagination really loves as well. So today we are honored to be joined by Dr. Colleen Hacker. Dr. Hacker has her PhD in sports and exercise psychology. She is a bit of a legend. John and I are really honored that she's here with us today. When you talk about mental skills or sports psychology, she's top of the heap. ESPN named Dr. Hacker as one of 30 women in the country who have changed the way sports are played. That's a pretty big statement. I'm going to read a little bit of your bio. I can't read all of it because it will take up this whole 30 minutes that we have together. But Dr. Hacker has served as a member of the United States coaching staff for over 6 Olympic Games. During her 12-year tenure with U.S. Soccer, the national team won the first gold medal, followed by a dramatic overtime victory with China in the historic 1999 World Cup. Most recently, Dr. Hacker has served as the mental skills coach for the U.S. national lacrosse team that won the World Championship in 2022. To date, Dr. Hacker has served on the coaching staff of more than 10 World Championship events in soccer, in ice hockey, and lacrosse. She's been inducted into 7 Hall of Fames, both as an athlete and as a coach. She's in demand as a speaker and as a consultant for Fortune 500, Fortune 100. She's published 2 books. One is Catch Them Being Good. I love that title. And the second one is one that I am currently reading, Achieving Excellence, Mastering the Mindset for Peak Performance in Sport and in Life. So welcome, Dr. Hacker. We are delighted to have you here with us today.
Well, I'm delighted to be here, Joe. And every time there's an introduction, I'm involved in whatever capacity. I'm reminded that if anybody's having a bad day, just get formally introduced and you instantly feel like your tires have been pumped up in some way. So that was gracious and generous. So thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
Thank you. We're going to jump right in, and I'm going to pass it over to another doctor in the house, Dr. Jonathan Rhodes.
Yeah, I think we're curious for a few things. First off, when do you sleep? I think is the biggest question. But I think we want to start with kind of where it all began in terms of your imagination as a child. Did you think you were going to be here now as a kind of a world-class sports psychologist? Did you think that was part of your script, or are you off script?
Absolutely not. And I think that shocks people. I'm in higher education now, and I listen to so many of my students who will publicly and personally own, I want to work with professional athletes. I want to work with Olympians. I don't think I ever thought that until I was in my 3rd or 4th decade in life. All that I ever wanted to do, John, is I understood very early on, quite honestly, in my own competitive career, that the head and the heart were the separators. You know, I wasn't the biggest, the tallest, the fastest, or the strongest. But why was I achieving at levels beyond people that had more physical, raw gifts than me? And I understood that it was in the psychological dimension. Let's say it this way. I'm of a certain age where majoring in sports psychology wasn't even available to me. It wasn't until I went to graduate school. So I think that's important to know. No, I'm living beyond my wildest dreams. Even though I'm doing it now, I guess it's still not my dream. My fundamental dream is to help people maximize the capabilities they have, to stay there longer, and hopefully to enjoy that process. And I don't care. I've done my own soccer camp, football. I've done my own soccer camp for 29 years. You don't do anything for 29 years if you don't love it. And that's for children. So I'm not all into this, oh, I work with Olympic athletes. Oh, I work with professional athletes. I work with human beings who want to maximize their potential. And I'll take that in any environment, at any level, in any domain that it comes to me. And I feel like it's an honor and a blessing to serve them in that journey.
Amazing. And as a child, were you an imaginative child?
I think I've been interviewed, as you can imagine, I don't think I've ever been asked that. And if you're an interviewer and you ask a question that's never been asked before, gold medal to you. It really gives me pause, Joe. It gives me pause. And then you have to be careful of revisionist history, right? Looking back and imbuing yourself with qualities that you didn't have. But, I'm just going to own it, right? Getting older beats the alternative. And I'll let that sink in for folks. Getting older isn't fun, but it beats the alternative. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have, there was not the internet kind of thing. And so your question, yes, I was an imaginative child. And your question, look at what it does to my face. I was imaginative in many domains on a daily basis. You were imaginative in the games you made up. You were imaginative in the roles that you played. You were imaginative in the championships. Rather than consuming the game-winning shot, you couldn't consume all the game-win. You know what I'm saying? I'm scrolling on my phone now. I don't know if people can see me or not. You couldn't do it literally. So you imagined being on the free throw line. You imagined nailing the final dive. I started out in competitive swimming and diving. So you imagine nailing the competitive. All that I'm saying is, yes, I've never been asked it before. And your question makes manifest for me just how ubiquitous imagination was and I don't mean just in childhood. I mean throughout my formative years, from cognition to well into my 20s. And honestly, I'd say to this day, but it was fundamental.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for going there with us. We like to ask questions that sort of broaden the mind, because the imagination does like oxygen and air. And one of the things I really appreciate about you is hearing that before the World Cup, you had everyone put down like the stats and the planning and the strategy, and they simply went and did team building and they had fun.
I love that. And I don't know if I'll tell the story in the shortest way, as you can imagine, but here's the coaching staff, the United States national team, #1 ranked in the team in the world, playing for the grandest prize. Like Americans like gold medals a little bit more, unless you're a footballer, you don't. But in football, World Cup is it. It's just it. It's not the gold medal. They're fun, but it's the World Cup. So here we are playing on the world's largest stage in the world's largest sport with the highest viewership for any female sport on planet Earth. So you can imagine the coaching meeting the day before the last night. Do you know what I'm saying? So 2 before we played. And some on the staff, our coach, Tony DeChico, was wonderful about bringing in experts and then listening. He made the final decisions, but just briefly, one coach is saying we need to add some set pieces because we've been so heavily scouted. Another coach said, let's look at some more film. Let's look at China and break down China. Really logical, common themes. Each person made their point. And I said, I don't want this team to think they're missing anything. I don't want this team to feel as though there's another piece that if they just get that other piece, then they'll be the best. They already are there. They already have it. So let's focus on us and lift. And we laughed our faces off for the last night. Now, it was purposeful. It wasn't just fun for fun's sake, right? If you know anything about experiential learning and adventure education, I would like to say I carefully orchestrated what we did. So there's always a message and then a meta message. But we laughed our faces off. We marched and we're in cadence with each other. We waved flags. We drank apple juice and pretended it was champagne. We just loved on each other, and we loved on the opportunity that we were going to get tomorrow. And when I look at some athletes competing in their pinnacle sport, you just see the seriousness, the heaviness, the tightness, like, this is important and I will be great today. And I'm like, nah, it's not your superpower. It's not your superpower. So I'm surprised that you knew that. And I love that story about the 99ers. We chose team building.
I like that, because it's interesting, because quite often, especially before big competitions, people go very internal, like thinking about their game, thinking about the following day, rather than what you did was connect people, get out their heads, to connect, to share stories, to laugh together. I think there's something really valuable in that human connection piece, always, as psychologists or as leaders or whatever we do, to connect each other, especially before big pressure events, is really essential.
Yeah. And in some ways, I'd say it's the equivalent of thinking a pass ahead. We're taught to do that. Better performers think a pass ahead. Best performers think 2 passes ahead. That our head coach selected that pitch, for lack of a better way to say it. He made the final choice. I made the pitch. He made the choice. But he selected that knowing that there would be pressure, expectations, tightness, and said, we've got an antidote for that. We've got an antidote for that. It is about relationships. You don't go to work sports, you go to play sports. And I think we often forget that. And especially, I might add, at the highest levels. You play tennis, you play soccer, right? Think about our own language. So do our actions reflect that knowledge? Do our actions reflect those values?
And I know you're really into words, right? Words matter. You say that in your book. And these 2 words, visualization versus imagery. Can you talk about that difference?
Joe and Dr. Rhodes, there's the first thing I want you to hear from me. Can I clone you? Can I clone you?
Yes.
You both will know I'm telling the truth. And all that I'm going to do is throw myself on the belief of your audience to say, before we met, way before this isn't about the podcast or whatever, I wrote to you and said, thank you for talking about imagery rather than visualization. I feel like if I hear the word visualization one more time, someone's going to get hurt. And I don't know if it's going to be them or me, but words do matter. Visualization is ubiquitous. It's old. It's so narrow. There's little data that visualization improves performance, and there's a huge body of literature that imagery improves performance. So it's like, can we get out of the 50s and 60s? I've been living in that old language for way too many decades. It ain't the 50s and 60s anymore, sports writers, coaches, and athletes. It's the modern era. And imagery, language does matter. Imagery is correct. And the more sophisticated our tools become, you both know about fMRI, that didn't exist early in my career. So we talked about psychoneuromuscular hypothesis. We talked about theories. Now we can point and say, this is your brain. This is your brain on life. This is your brain on imagery. Look at the similarities. So as we've gone, so this gives me goosebumps when I talk about
me
this.
too. I have goosebumps.
It's just a fact. So imagery is polysensory. It needs to be contextually mapped as close to the actual event in vividness, in controllability, and in emotional affect, and in emotional correlates, which is the third piece that even people that know to say imagery now forget the emotion piece of it. So as long as you're dealing with those big three, now we see the literature coming to your support, providing foundation, and I would argue a springboard to more likely achieve your potential.
Love it. I'm with you. I'm with you. I think again, I think there's that whole need to be multisensory or polysensory. Do you feel that there are situations where you need to have all senses utilized, or situations where you feel that as a shortcut? I mean, in your experience of using imagery, is it 3-4 senses? Does it matter?
Yeah, I feel like if I was a medical doctor and you asked me, do you think people should take vitamins and minerals? I know the answer is no, because you're just supposed to eat it. And then you say, do you take vitamins and minerals? And they all say yes, right? It's one of those things. I know I'm supposed to say yes, John, right? They all matter. But here's what I would say. A couple of things, and I'll start with two, and then if you want to follow up. Number one, I think the literature shows that the more senses are involved, the more multi-sense, polysensory you are, the more efficacious imagery is. So using two senses is better than one, 3 is better than 2. You understand what I'm saying? So yeah. I think the literature is clear on that. Is multi-sensory is preferred and advantageous.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now let's get real. I think there's a big 3. And if you can bring in 4 and 5, I'm your mama. I'm like here with you. Like, you go, boy, you go, girl. But I think for my clients, whatever your discipline, you can go to 3, and you should. So I don't know if that helps at all, John.
Perfect.
I mean, I know
yeah.
Or if you want me to talk about them, but those are
I think it would be helpful for you to talk a little bit about, like, because some people, they struggle with it initially, right? Like some athletes tend to take to it right away, but you'll have some people feel like, I don't know, is this really going to help me? So how do you handle that?
Yeah, well, 2 different questions, right? Court of law, that's a compound question, but how do I handle resistant and reluctant athletes? First of all, I do on a daily basis. I would argue that about 30%, and there's no data to support this. I'm just anecdotal in my career, so take it however you want. About 30% of elite athletes that I initially work with, they're like, yeah, it's not for me. Like, I'm already won a gold medal. Like, I'm already doing great. Like, yeah, it's not their jam. Mm-hmm. And so my entry point, I'm a bit of a quoteaholic, but I love the John F. Kennedy quote that says, the time to repair the roof is when the sun is shining. And so what I try to tell them about is, let's be proactive. Let's be preemptive. Because by the time you realize that you should have invested in imagery, it's too late. It's too late. Yeah. I don't want you to say I woulda, shoulda, coulda. I want you to say I did. So the first thing is that about 30% are what I call the resistant and the reluctant. And then there's a middle third that's like, I don't know, she's interesting. This sounds kind of cool. I'll give it a twirl. And then the other 30% is like, more. Like, they recognize it as their superpower. And so when they see expertise and when they get the science, they're just going, I told you so. This has been the differentiator. So yeah, I'm undaunted by people who are non-believers. I'm undaunted. I look at it as an opportunity to teach and to motivate. I think when we know better, we do better. Mm-hmm. I just feel that when we know better, we do better. So I try a lot of different entry points to help them know better, because these are not my opinions. There's data, evidence, research, science. So you can believe it or not, but it's not going to change the fact of it, right? It's not going to change the fact of it. So that's the answer to the second part of your question. The answer to the first part of your question, for me, the big 3 are kinesthesis, visual and auditory. I don't think there's any sport that if you really are immersed in your craft, that those three are fundamental. Yeah, for me, it's like, look, if you can't do three, let me help you. But three's my opening bid. Does that help?
I'll see your three, yes, and I will
Yes, way to
No, I
pick
see
it
you. I
up.
see you.
Way to pick it up, John. Right? Like if you can bring in gustatory, great.
Yeah.
Right? If you can bring in olfactory, great.
Yeah,
bonus points
agreed.
for you. But let's focus on the main thing, not the dessert, I guess is what I say.
I think it's interesting how you say that, because often visual or kinesthetic is the gateway to other senses. So, if you were to think about balance, or think about balancing on a bike, you're going to probably see the bike, and then you're going to probably think about the proprioception, and then you're going to, you start to set the scene. So often having two senses, they trigger other senses as time goes on as well. Where visual often is the gateway, people often see that link as well. But it's actually interesting you say that, because around, looking at working with individuals, people who generally say, the 30% who are the nightmare to work with, often who don't buy in. It's quite nice being a researcher, because I can often say, that's my 30% in my control group, and I've got my other group now who I'm going to work with. And seeing is believing. For a lot of athletes, seeing is believing. So they'll see the impact, and the ones who have imagery-based training will be talking about it, and you can you can see the improvement in performance. And often the 30% or so who are in the control will say, "Can I have that?" So it's a way to buy in.
One for this table, please. One for this table. It's interesting. I'm going to model what you just said. Me hearing you tell that story connected memory for me. And memory is a powerful form of imagery. Like I use the creation and recreation of past events as imagery training with athletes. Anyway, just a quick little fun fact. My very first formal meeting with the United States women's national team, think of all the mental skills you could pick. Think of all the things I might have chosen to do. And I was in residency. So I do think the model that we used is noteworthy. In other words, I didn't just fly in and do a talk, and, I don't even know what that is. I moved to Florida. I lived in Florida. I was 24/7 with that team prior to the Olympic Games. But now it's my first meeting. So it's like, oh boy, grown-up moment. What topic did I choose? Imagery. Fact. And here's the second piece to that, which your sentence engendered. Like, I want a piece of that. I said to Tony Chico, again, the head coach, I said, I don't want it to be mandatory. You make people do this stuff, and all of a sudden there's pushback, there's lack of agency. They feel like they're being controlled. So a lot of mental skills coaches require everybody there, or what. I'm like, make it voluntary. So this is back in the day where we only had 16 people. It's just mind-blowing to me. In the first Olympic Games, the IOC only allowed 16 players on the roster. If you know anything about the physical demands in soccer, they really should have had a chat with sports scientists. But we had 16 on the roster, and I said, I'm going to do the first session this evening after you get your treatments and so on and so forth. It's voluntary. Come if you want, don't come if you don't. I'm not taking names. There's no judgment here. 12 of the 16 came. 12 of the 16 chose to come, and 10 of the 12 were starters. 10 of the 12 were starters. And you can imagine me taking note. I come back after that meeting. I'm like, Tony's like, oh, that was a good group. That was a good number. I'm like, it's not the number. Look at who came. So now the non-starters are watching the starters saying, if you have something that can help me, I want to hear it. Yeah. In essence, the non-starters were going, I don't know if you know this, but like, I'm good. I'm on the national team. I don't know if you know this, but we're the #1 team in the world. I don't know if you know this, but I won a bazillion Division I national champ. Like, they were good. They were good. They were good. And the starters were hungry. Do you see the difference?
Mhm.
The starters were hungry. So I think that meta message, without me opening my mouth or being interesting or competent or capable, I think that message also resonated.
Absolutely. We're going to shift to some questions from the audience for the last 5 minutes. One, and this is a great one from Carol, how do you turn negative imagery, an example, failed competition, into a positive one with the athlete?
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge question. I have answers for it. We have to do it all the time.
Mhm.
I will just preface what I'm about to say is, if anybody gives you a simple or short answer to a complex human problem, run away from that person, because that's the tip off that they don't know what they're talking about. I'm just being blunt. So it's more nuanced, it's more complex, but you cannot run away from failure, loss, severe disappointment.
Mhm.
So we want to so if it's imagery, we want to take that moment. Failure is not final. Failure needs to be used as fertilizer to fertilize future competition. So I want to take that failure, and I always put it in quotes. I want to use it as fertilizer. And then again, my phrases, like I'm sort of a phraseologist, but I'll say, let's extract the relevant lesson. The whole competition wasn't bad. Where are these mental toughness moments? Did you recognize it as a mental toughness moment? Did you manage there? Most competitions sort of teeter-totter on these critical moments, these critical decisions, these critical demands for best performance.
Mhm.
So let's extract the relevant lesson. Let's learn, practice, incorporate, refine. So now we don't leave it to chance, we bring it under control. That's the simplest answer. But notice I had a lot of commas in there in the verbs that we need to do. It's a stepping stone. But there's people like, forget about it, forget about it. I'm like, have you, like, for instance, ever worked in sport? Nobody forgets about, they remember it. They remember it. I can tell you the 2 silver medals we won. I can tell you all about the 2 silver medals we won. I haven't forgotten them, but I've used them. Right? I extracted the relevant lesson from that silver medal, and we're going to take control to change the color of that medal 4 years from now. And we've done that. We've done that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Carol was really happy with that answer. I feel like we can't dive into the next one. The next one is about injury, which is a great question. And we're going to answer that because I think that this is, having come back from an injury myself. Oh, you want to answer? Okay. All right. Let's go.
I'm going to say quickly, because I love that somebody asked that. When I'm working with elite athletes, because we have a medical team and I'm part of the medical team, when someone has sustained an injury, when they're out of practice or competition for a period of time, it might be a season, might be 2 weeks. What I want the listeners to say, the first thing I do with them is imagery. Because I'll just say it simply, what the data shows is they'll lose less and they'll come back faster. So show me an injured athlete. If I'm working with them, then we work imagery into that rehabilitation.
Amazing. You're amazing. I love your energy. You have like, I feel like going out for a run right now. It's been, we have an Olympian who just posted, Dan Walsh, who's an incredible rower, like a legend in the sport of rowing, right? Rowing is a sport where you have to get through the pain. Dan's going to be, he's going to be joining us for a conversation on how to push past that point of pain or discomfort. So stay tuned next time. I want to thank you so much, Dr. Hacker. And if you haven't read her book, it's really amazing. There's so much good information in here. And we're going to be a team. We're going to stay in touch and, sort of have imagery be the word and not visualization. That's our mission, should we move forward.
I have valued I have valued what I hope is 2 long-term friends and colleagues, and I look forward to our next opportunity.
Absolutely. Real quickly, and I'll just mention this. Somebody who's involved with the Olympic Foundation said, could you help us with the Olympic blues? So we'll pick up next time. What do you do after you reach your goal, right? How do we use imagery to help these athletes? So I think that's a valid, anyway, the conversation's going to continue. You're amazing. We're so happy to have you with us. So thank you so much. And for those of you who want to get in touch with us, it's imagerycoaching.com. We have classes so you can use imagery effectively. John and the team at the Studying Functional Imagery Training have really dived into what works. How do we use it efficiently, effectively, whether you're an athlete, a non-athlete, there's something in it for everyone. So thank you so much for joining us.